Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Monday, May 6th. To paraphrase the late Ed Koch, how do I look? And I apologize, they're obviously building the house behind me. So, a bear mauled me while I was running this week. It was very traumatic. Or let's just say that I fell while I was running. And this is probably going to start looking worse, I imagine. It's just like a giant ugh. And my hands are all screwed up, and you should see my knees. But I ran again yesterday. The accident was Saturday. I ran yesterday. I'll keep running. I don't know why I tripped. But you know, I'm 55 years old, so stuff happens. I really apologize about the house. But anyway, what can you do? Okay, it's 4:03 p.m. Eastern Time. Dow Jones finished up. Excuse me, the Dow Jones finished down 5 points to 14,968. Thought I'd give you my better side. S&P 500 was up 3 points. New all-time high 1617. NASDAQ up 0.4% to 33.92. Gold closed at $14.69, up $5. Oil 95.80, up 20 cents in the 10-year Treasury, 1.77%. I was watching about a half hour ago on CNBC this defender of high-frequency trading who comes on from time to time, Minaj, and how it's HFT is so necessary to provide liquidity. If that's the defense, it's total BS. America's capital markets did just fine for decades and decades before high-frequency trading. So defenders, take a hike. Overseas, in China, HSBC's PMI on the service sectors fell to 51.1 in April from 54.3 in March. That is not good. HSBC says staffing in China's service sector decreased for the first time since January of 2009. China's own National Statistics Office said that the service sector eased to 54.5. That figure was still down from March. A euro area composite of services and manufacturing increased to 46.9 in April, up from 46.5 in March. But remember, 50 is the dividing line between growth and contraction. And the earlier flash report had April's number at 46.5, which would have been unchanged from March. This is hardly a big deal that it ticked up to 46.9. The manufacturing component itself actually fell to 46.7 from 46.8 in March. Eurozone retail sales fell 0.1% in March after a 0.2% drop in February, according to Eurostat. Retail sales in Spain declined 10.5% in March over a year earlier. The Italian government now projects Italy's economy will shrink 1.4% this year. They had previously said it would fall only 0.5%. That is significant. The government also says unemployment will rise this year to a record 12.2%. Excuse me, 12.3%. And in France, French Finance Minister Pierre Moscovici declared the era of austerity over after his German counterpart, Wolfgang Schäuble, offered flexibility on deficit cutting amid renewed bickering between Europe's two biggest economies. Basically, Chancellor Angela Merkel respected Nicolas Sarkozy as being a, quote, statesman, and she doesn't feel the same way about new French President Francois Hollande, who has been in office 1 year and has poll numbers of 25%, which kind of sucks. Moscovici, the finance minister, said, "We're witnessing the end of the dogma of austerity. We've been pleading for a growth policy for a year. Austerity on its own impedes growth." The gap between the French socialist finance chief's view and the election year positioning of Germany's Schäuble underscores the divergence between their economies and the wrangling that has marked the crisis since Hollande replaced Sarkozy. As reported by Bloomberg's James Hertling, Hertling being an appropriate name for one covering the Eurozone, coalition lawmakers in Germany are pushing back against the 2-year extension for France to meet European Union deficit rules floated by Olli Rehn, the EU Economic and Monetary Affairs Commissioner. As I've been saying all along, Chancellor Merkel, in campaigning for a third term, the vote is in September. But with that going on, policy making among Europe's political leaders has ground to a crawl. Mindful of a potential backlash from German voters in an election year, calls by senior coalition lawmakers for Euro members to stick to the Euro's deficit rules, 3% of GDP, may limit Merkel's ability to help France. At the same time, Hollande pressed Merkel to overcome the demands of electioneering to keep the Euro area's campaign to shore up its finances by keeping the march toward a banking union on track. They're supposed to be meeting on this in June. Hollande said in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, "Ms. Merkel has upcoming elections and cannot give the impression that she's taking greater care of Europeans than of Germans. If I had a hammer." The risk is that Germany may want to wait until after its elections to move ahead on the banking union. In Portugal, it's planning to cut 30,000 civil service jobs and to raise the retirement age by 1 year to 66 as it tries to meet the terms of its bailout agreement. 30,000 civil service jobs. Prime Minister Coelho said civil servants would also be required to work 40 hours a week instead of 35. I'm sorry, Portuguese civil service workers, you get no sympathy from me. Very interesting situation in Germany with the start today of a trial of a member of the neo-Nazi underground and 4 alleged associates. This is a big one. It's going to garner a lot of worldwide attention. The case follows the discovery of a terror cell alleged to have been responsible for a decade-long string of racially motivated murders and bombings, as well as at least 15 armed bank heists. The lead defendant is Beate Zschäpe, 38, the last surviving member of the cell, who is accused of complicity in 10 murders, plus at least 2 bombings. 8 of the murder victims were immigrants of Turkish origin. One was a man from Greece, and the last in the series was a German policewoman. The killings became known as the Donner murders after the Donner kebabs sold on market stalls operated by several of the Turkish victims. All were executed at close range with the same Chesky automatic pistol. But in spite of the indications of a racial motive for the murders, The police and security services insisted at the time that their prime suspects were rival Turkish gangs or drug runners. So you can see the issue is total incompetence on the part of the German police. It's the failure to expose the neo-Nazi terror cell that is capturing a ton of the publicity in Germany itself. 3 separate parliamentary inquiries have been established, producing embarrassing revelations about files that were destroyed before the inquiries were completed and paid informers who used their cash from the authorities to fund neo-Nazi activities. Several top officials have had to resign. In Syria, Israel's weekend airstrike on a military complex near the Syrian capital of Damascus killed at least 42 Syrian soldiers, according to a group of anti-regime activists, citing information from military hospitals. The bombings of targets near the Syrian capital, including 2 strikes in a 48-hour period beginning Friday, represent a risk-laden strategy based on the calculation that retaliatory strikes against Israel by Syria or its allies are unlikely. Still, the bombings inevitably raise the specter of a broader regional war in the heart of the Middle East. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu felt comfortable enough to fly off to China for a 5-day scheduled visit. But the airstrikes, Israeli officials say, the goal is to prevent Syria's advanced weaponry, much of it made in Iran, from being transferred to Lebanon and then on into the hands of Hezbollah. If we don't take action now, we will be on the receiving end of those missiles, said a senior Israeli government official. He gave that comment to the Los Angeles Times. We have to act to guarantee our security, and that applies to Syria and Iran. The Syrian Foreign Ministry, in a letter of protest to the United Nations, said Israeli missiles on Sunday struck 3 military sites. Netanyahu has repeatedly warned Syria that transferring chemical or advanced weapons to Hezbollah would be a red line as well. It would be a red line as far as Israel is concerned, but with Assad's survival uncertain, Israeli analysts say that Hezbollah and Iran feel an urgency to transfer these weapons to Lebanon. A Syrian Foreign Ministry official in Damascus told CNN that the attacks were a declaration of war. Syrian opposition figures did not want to be associated with an attack by Israel. Said one opposition activist in Damascus, "I don't think Israel would do us a favor." The targeting suggests that Israeli officials view the Jamraya compound, situated about 20 miles from the Lebanese border, as a crucial distribution center for armaments headed to Hezbollah. Despite the clear risk of retaliation, Israeli officials seem confident that both the Syrian government and Hezbollah are too preoccupied with Assad's struggle for survival to open a new front with Israel. Hezbollah has acknowledged, especially last week, that they are dispatching fighters to help Assad. Senator Patrick Leahy, Democrat of Vermont, said on Meet the Press yesterday, the Russian-supplied air defense systems are not as good as said. Senator John McCain, Republican Arizona, said on Fox News Sunday that the Israeli airstrikes should put more pressure on the White House to aid forces fighting the Assad regime. The White House is weighing whether to arm the rebels after intelligence reports indicated that Assad's forces had used sarin gas. The real wild card in the aftermath of the Israeli strikes might be Iran. where officials are in the midst of a presidential election campaign. The vote is in June, but they have warned that any attack against Syria would be viewed as a strike against Iran. Netanyahu did not comment on Sunday about the attack, but he convened his security cabinet, this is before he went to China, to discuss the matter. 2 Iron Dome missile interception systems were deployed in northern Israel, and commercial flights in the region were suspended as a precaution. Iran's deputy chief of staff, however, did tell Iran state television that the resistance, Hezbollah, will retaliate for the Israeli aggression on Syria. One other comment by John McCain, he said, "Every day that goes by, Hezbollah increases their influence and the radical jihadists flow into Syria, and the situation becomes more and more tenuous." McCain calling for a no-fly zone, which is what I called for, about 21 months ago. Meanwhile, this is interesting. United Nations human rights investigators have gathered testimony from casualties of the war and medical workers indicating that rebel forces have used the nerve agent sarin. The United Nations Independent Commission of Inquiry on Syria has not yet seen evidence of government forces using chemical weapons. Carla Del Ponte, a commission member, said, "Our investigators have been in neighboring countries interviewing victims, doctors, and field hospitals. According to their reports of last week, which I have seen, there are strong, concrete suspicions, but not yet incontrovertible evidence of the use of sarin gas." But she added this was use on the part of the opposition, the rebels, not by the government authorities. Meanwhile, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's investigation into the chemical weapons attacks has stalled. Finally, bad news in Afghanistan. 8 U.S. soldiers were killed Saturday, making it the bloodiest day this year for Western troops. 2 were shot in an insider attack, 1 died in a small arms attack, and 5 Americans were killed when their vehicles struck a roadside bomb. 8 in one day. So keep the men and women of our armed forces in your thoughts and prayers. That's all for today. Take care.